Boom! Happy Easter, hoop heads. Thanks again for watching. As always, like it, subscribe it, comment it, share it, obliterate it, whatever you feel is necessary. Just give us a little attention. It's all we're asking for. Today, we're doing a little tiers. This is going to be the end of our tiers rankings for the 2023-24 regular season. This is going to essentially give way into draft talk, into play-in talk, into postseason talk, and eventually off-season talk. But before we get there, let's go ahead and try to encapsulate as best we can the 2023-24 season. Some of these teams we're going to highlight through. I'm going to do this in reverse order where I usually throw the contenders out first. This time I'm going to go ahead and start with all the teams that are probably going to be more important next week when we're talking about draft prospects than teams that are important to the actual 2023-24 season. But teams can still play spoilers. We're still looking at futures of players. There's still much to look at with these teams as far as longevity goes. But for deciding this year's winner, this year's title winner, better luck next year, right? That's the theme. And let's start in the Western Conference. At the bottom, the Utah Jazz, not at the actual bottom. They're going to be the 12th. They're 29-45. Remember, there was a time in life this season when this team not only looked like a play-in team, but potentially even one that could rise above that. That was a long time ago. They're 1-9 in their last 10. I have the standings here. No need to look confused on my face. That is facts. They've lost 8 in a row. Yeah, 8 in a row at the moment. That's incredibly bad. Lauri Markkanen has been shut down for the rest of the season. Not a whole lot of happy thoughts going on about the games you have to watch this year for Utah, but you still have your progression of your young guys. So it's never a complete loss. But, of course, missing a bunch of Lauri this season has probably been the biggest contributor to all of this. But now you move forward with the progress of whatever this rebuild is supposed to look like. You could always be in the situation the Memphis Grizzlies are in, where they're 24-50 now. They're the 13th seed in the West. They're pretty much done. I think all these teams are eliminated. So Marcus Smart, Derrick Rose, Zaire Williams have all been shut down since last we talked, I believe, at least. Jaren Jackson Jr. most likely could be coming down the pipeline soon. They've been the most injured team in basketball history at this point. I think they've had 31 different players suit up for them this year, which is the new record. None of those things are awesome, but you return Jaren Jackson Jr. next year. You return John Morant next year. You have the potential to return some other interesting players or move them for something, whatever that package might end up being. Then you'll end up in a situation where maybe you'll look at this season as a blessing in disguise. Of course, there's some of the stuff that needed to get cleaned up before all of the injuries this season that we still need to make sure is good moving forward. But otherwise, I think, you're going to look at it as a season where not even the coach should be at too much to blame here. Shouldn't have too much fallout from this. Just, hey, here's a great draft pick, and let's get this thing back on the right train moving forward as of next season. Charlotte shouldn't be on my list where they are, but they are. So, oops. But they're not on your list where you're looking at. So, Portland, 19-54 or 55. The Western Conference 14th seed. They're playing some of their worst basketball. Scoot Henderson just put up the record for the worst plus-minus performance in a game. Not necessarily his fault on that. I mean, that's pretty tough, but it's kind of like in 2K, you get your crappy team together. Your crappy is like, a 68 overall when you start or something in that game. And then you just get drilled by some opponent that's, much better than you. Miami wasn't that much better, but from that night they were. Portland had been looking nice. Now it's kind of regressing back to what this always had been. There's nothing too damaging about any of this when it comes to the young guys playing and not playing. You still don't have Shaedon Sharpe. So it's just one of those things. You're down a lot of people. You're not playing your best basketball. I do wonder a little bit about Chauncey Billups' future there. kind of feel like maybe he's got the most experience of all the coaches that are in this category. And you would wonder if they would probably move on from him at that point. Or well, I guess not. I did just mention Charlotte, who definitely has more coaching experience in that regard, or in San Antonio, obviously, who's next, who essentially is the exception to this rule because there's no way that Popovich would ever be fired from that situation. At least you'd hope not. It would have to be something that would dramatically change the rest of the way we view him. We don't want that. Don't come after Popovich. So Wemby's making a massive leap. I think he could make a very interesting case for Defensive Player of the Year, but he'll likely just win Rookie of the Year, likely be first-team rookie, all-rookie, no doubt. And then it's kind of a question of, does he do enough to get into some of these other ballots elsewhere? And I find that to be a pretty interesting call because I think that he's finally getting to where he needs to get to. The Spurs have played together long enough that even though they're not a great roster, they're playing as good a basketball as they can possibly play. So yeah, you find it interesting. 4-6 in the last 10. They have every reason to want to play spoiler and keep winning. You know, the likelihood of getting the number 1 overall pick back to back in the lottery is not that great anyway. So you don't expect to bank on that anyway. So you're just trying to win, trying to build for this thing like you have been. Nothing too crazy going on there, especially with the injuries, thankfully, obviously with Wemby. That's been a big storyline of this season. And now that we're almost done with it, it looks like that's not going to be a massive storyline moving forward. Of course, they did baby him a little bit this season on that, but I don't think that even when he's playing, Wemby unleashed minutes next season, that we should have too much worry there. He seems to be a pretty good, pretty well held up kid for 7'4" and, just stick and bones. Moving into the next year tier of our Eastern Conference. We're going to start with the Toronto Raptors, who are currently the highest part of this tier. And these are all the teams that have been eliminated in the Eastern Conference as well. So Toronto's 23-50. They're 0-10 in their last 10 games, or on a 12-game losing streak. They're the worst team in basketball. RJ Barrett just lost his brother in a very tough story. He's not with the team. Emmanuel Quickley's not with the team for another reason I don't know that I actually ever found out about. And then, of course, Jonte Porter decided to throw the sports world on its head with his little whatever that story ends up being. We've covered that on the main pod, so if you don't know what I'm talking about, please refer to last week's main pod. Sorry about it, but at least it's at the beginning, and then you get to stay for all the Rangers hoopla. You know what I mean? It's not just basketball hoopla, it's Rangers hoopla. Look at that right there. Anyway, that's kind of where we're at with Toronto. They're going to be on a few people's schedules that matter a lot to finish this season out. So it would be nice to see them be competitive. Although that's coming from my perspective of wanting to see some of these playoff teams earn their way in. Of course, those playoff teams are sure that they would like Toronto to stay where they've been as they make their way towards them. Then Charlotte, like I had teased earlier, Charlotte is pretty much been, there was a brief uptick after the trade deadline. I made a joke about them making a run on things, and they didn't really get very far with that run at all. Still a fun little group. They've added some talent I think is good for the future. They've allowed themselves a bit of a reset, even if they don't keep LaMelo long-term, or even if they do keep LaMelo long-term. Shutting him down this season obviously sort of continues that issue. It continues to have that another season of not full LaMelo ball action that gives you more pause about what he could be in the future. But of course, this also could be a great way to keep him cheap for longer. And then you're building around him and Brandon Miller and whatever this next pick will be. So Charlotte's still searching for some identity, still searching for winning consistent basketball. Whether they keep their coach or not is an interesting conversation. I think it would make a lot of sense for them to, but then if there's a hot young coaching commodity on the market, they're probably a good suitor for that. The new ownership stuff is certainly given us some moments of joy, but it's still sort of skeptical skeptical city for me when it comes to Charlotte Hornets until I see consistent behavior that says this team doesn't just want to build a playoff team once or twice. This team wants to build something serious and try to compete for as much as they can. There's probably fewer teams in all of pro sports that feel further away from a championship than Charlotte Hornets. So to get them just into a respectable playoff contending role is all you're looking for. I think this season there was some signs of that. It'll have to stay healthy. It'll have to get better and deeper, obviously. But I do have a lot more positivity coming out of this Charlotte Hornets season than I would have going into it. The Washington Wizards and the Detroit Pistons make up the bottom. Of course, they have for quite some time. Detroit shut down a few of their young guys. So, of course, they're in a little bit of a position where they're, stringing along what's left of the group. At least Cade Cunningham's back, kind of looking at the positives there. Washington, similar situation where Bilal Coulibaly has been shut down. However, now we're getting a little more efficient Jordan Poole. You got a coaching change midseason, we were very quiet on that front other than the whole craziness with Doc Rivers. But Wes Unseld moving on, Washington hiring or bringing on, sorry for this dude's name. I'm not going to be able to remember it. Brian Keefe. And so he's an interesting guy. When you're restarting a program, obviously that's about as good of a shot as you're going to have as a coach to make your mark. So to see some of these signs early is good. To see signs with Jordan Poole is even better because there's a lot of folks circling him as the worst contract in the league. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think it's possible. I don't think it's the reality yet. And I think that Washington can figure out a means to make the Jordan Poole situation work. I do feel like that. And so that's pretty much it with all the teams that we don't need to worry about for the rest of the season. Funny enough, that wasn't how I game planned this. It's just kind of how my tiers ended up breaking down. But I guess by proxy, that's sort of how this works. The only team that you would wonder, hey, why is this team not in your Better Luck Next Year team? It's because they're in my danger zone. And if you know anything about the danger zone, I don't play about the danger zone. You're going to be there for a while once you get in there. But we're not on to the danger zone yet. We're on to the mid. Some teams that are going to be mighty pissy with me, or fan bases for sure that will be mighty pissy with me for my selections, but I have to stick by my word. I have to go by what I know, and I have to be honest about what I see. And I think that for the Eastern Conference, these three teams still very much alive, still very much interesting. All three sort of have different levels of trajectory, I think, but all sort of just for this season, for just the 2023-2024 season, are a big, fat, stinking pile of mid. Sometimes being mid is a bad thing. Sometimes being mid is a pretty damn good thing. I would say for Orlando, that's not such a bad thing. This team hasn't been very good for a while, for like a decade. They've got two of the most interesting young forwards in the game. They've got a bevy of other young players that are interesting. You've got Jonathan Isaac finally healthy and looking like a all-defensive team member. So really, the only issues you have now, you have Jamal Mosley, who seems to be one of the more popular young coaches in the league. When it comes to evaluating coaches, that's a difficult situation. So I can't really say how much I like or don't like the guy that's succeeding with good talent. But you have serious signs of progress early, and that's a great inflection point, a great thing to look at for Mosley. It just comes down to I don't think this team has a super high IQ altogether. I just don't think the experience is good enough. I think they've lost a couple of games. This last week was kind of a slide for them, where they're 6-4 on the last 10. So if that's a slide by the new Orlando Magic standard, that's a pretty good thing. But they had a little slide. They had a couple of games that felt like they should have won, let them kind of go. The shooting is still a problem with this roster. You would probably assume that they are going to figure out something with the guard room where they get a guard in that can shoot a little bit better next year. And I think that'll probably solve a lot of issues with this team offensively. And then again, defensively, it's just IQ. I think they've got a lot of good personnel to be a great defensive team. But I think there's a little bit of IQ that needs to keep going there. And I think rim protection is still something I would like to be a little more focused on when I'm nitpicking this team in the future. That being said, they kind of can build the way that the Denver Nuggets built, where I don't know that you have one guy that protects the rim that well, but you have such a long, linky group that you can probably protect the rim as a team well enough and it not matter. So ultimately, though, I put the Orlando Magic in mid. I think that they're probably the best case of what mid could be for where you're at in a rebuild. Indiana, you could look at this as a complete disservice to Indiana, but I think it's just the cold reality. I think this is a really fun group to watch, and I think they're a great 2K team. But I think that defensively, they're not a serious group at this moment. I think there's a lot of players on their roster that aren't very serious defenders, at least haven't been consistently. And I think that's something they're still going to have to build on. Now, they're as healthy as they can be, Benedict Mathurin being shut down and all. They're surging in a nice little way, I think, at the moment. They've got the opportunity to pull away and pull into a good seed in this, a top six, lock in a top 6 seed. There's 6 at the moment. To lock in a top 6 seed with sort of what's going on, 2 games ahead of Miami, 3 ahead of Philly, I think. There's something around those lines. So ultimately, you can still see a path for Indiana to achieve all their goals this season and set themselves up for the future. And maybe in a lot of ways, like Orlando, you think, hey, being mid right now isn't that bad. But I think for them, when you bring in a Pascal Siakam via that kind of trade, there's just a rush from everybody. And maybe not internally, but everyone else is very rushed. Why isn't this team good right now, right? For Indy, I think they probably understood that when they made that deal that they weren't getting that much better in the moment, but that they were helping to set themselves into that position to continue to get better. And now they have a healthy group, an interesting group, a talented group, and they're going to be able to go into a playoff series potentially against a Cavs team, potentially against the Knicks, the Magic, teams that I think they could make interesting series out of, and maybe even win a series. And then you're talking about this being a mid team is maybe a little bit disrespectful, but I think they've had a lot of opportunities to take themselves out of mid and be a contender if. And I think that they've just failed to show that consistently, and this is their penalty for it. It's not fair, but it is what it is. The Atlanta Hawks. I wrote the Atlanta Hawks off the last time that I did this, or was pretty close. And now, not only are they pretty much locked into the 10th seed, there is one Eastern Conference team we will get to in between the 10th and the 12th at the moment, keeping themselves mildly alive. But for the most part, it looks like Atlanta's going to be able to pull away with this, maybe even lock it in as soon as, by the end of this week. DeJounte Murray's making an interesting case for what Atlanta should do in the future. He's playing out of his mind basketball. There's a lot of theory on, of course, there's just the simple, he's getting more touches, so he's just, doing more with it. There is the argument that he's not covering for Trae Young on defense, and this is allowing the rest to go. Doesn't matter what your theory is on it. The reality is we all kind of thought Atlanta was done. Bury them off, maybe even let them lose a lot of games to really pile in there. The Nets will just naturally take that 10th position. No big deal. Hawks get another great opportunity to get a good draft pick next year. And then all of a sudden, like I said, this DeJounte Murray guy, he just can't stop himself. He's ball too hard university. And I kind of like that. It's very fun. I don't think that this is very interesting as far as the team goes. I think that they're still pretty banged up. They're still pretty lacking in overall depth. But damn, you kind of have to appreciate the guys that have stepped up and to keep this going. You kind of have to admit that they're better than Chicago, it feels like at the moment. So even though they're the 10th seed, they might even be able to rise up into the 9th seed, maybe even get crazy and get higher. But I don't want to go that far because I still like what's going on there with those 7 and 8 teams in the East. So we'll see. But I think for the Hawks, after all things considered this season, being called mid is probably a pretty good thing, especially since, you don't know what the future of this franchise can look like. And I don't even know if the fans, the team would have a good, honest answer for what they would want this group to look like moving forward. It's very fun to have this much optionality, but it's a very confusing path forward for that group. On our Western Conference mid, we've got three teams. One of them definitely would get me lit up like a Christmas tree. But the New Orleans Pelicans, they're going to lead me off in the mid. I think that they ascended beyond mid for a bit there with Brandon Ingram getting injured, though. It does feel like they kind of have fallen back. Now, they haven't fallen back into a way that is super concerning at all. I don't want to put it up like it's Ingram's carried this load and now they just can't exist anymore. They're doing actually pretty respectably well without him. My issue more is this is just sort of adding on to what I already kind of thought about this team where, man, New Orleans is finally showing and is finally reaping some of the benefits of what this rebuild was, the post-Anthony Davis trade, the Zion Williamson era, whatever you want to call it. But it feels like this season has maybe a year behind it where it should have been. They should have already been in a position where they're the most talented, where they're showing their talent every night, where they've got the depth, they've got this, and that. But they're still waiting on people. They're still waiting on Zion a little bit in ways. There's obviously Ingram's hit a bit of a setback here. CJ's playing out of his mind. Valanciunas playing well enough to where he's trying to figure out what his next contract's going to be. That's important to the situation. Najee Marshall, Herb Jones, obviously. Herb Jones has had an amazing season, maybe even a Defensive Player of the Year conversation season. So it's really such a talented group. Alvarado, Murphy, you have such a talented group built for the future. But it just feels like this is, again, similar to Orlando, something about the IQ, something about the point guard play. And then now compiling that with Ingram missing this very critical moment of the season where they had been playing their best basketball. I mean, really, really were in a position to jump into the fourth seed and maybe even just stick a flag down on the fourth seed before Ingram gets hurt. So I'm going to call them mid. People are probably going to be upset with it, but it is what it is. The next couple years of New Orleans basketball, this should be the worst year ever ranked in my mind. So there's a positive little ray of light there for you. Sacramento, 42-31, 6-4 in their last 10. Malik Monk out for the rest of the regular season, almost certainly. Probably a question mark to return in the play-in. Post-play-in, should they make it that far. But this is a team I've just kind of stuck by with the mid for a long time now, and I don't think that there's any reason to get away from it. This isn't a roster built to be serious defensively, and I don't care how great they are offensively. It's not a team that is built to make any damn sense defensively. And Keon Ellis comes in after you lose Kevin Huerter for this season. You're like, okay, maybe this is the positives. Maybe this is how they can move forward. But then again, you get the Mavs. You get two games against the Mavs at home, and they punk you out in both of them. Essentially, I mean, they punk you out in the first one for sure, and the second one, you're kind of getting back on that revenge, and then all of a sudden, they just kind of punk you again, and that's notable stuff. And I'm not trying to kill the Kings. I think the future of this franchise is still in good shape. I just think that you did well last season. You got to the 3 seed. You lost a series you probably shouldn't have lost to, but experience is a motherfucker, and the Warriors got you. You came back with it this year because that's what you're supposed to do. You made it a little bit better, but you didn't really make it good enough. You didn't fix the issues that you had that you lost the Warriors for. And now you're probably going to have to reimagine this group again pretty drastically to get it where it needs to be for the Sabonis Fox era to work and to have longevity and success, or else this will just be a little footnote, and I don't think that's what Sacramento wants in any way, shape, or form. But to maximize those two players, they're going to have to reimagine this roster to some extent. And they've got useful NBA players, but I don't know they've got useful NBA players for what they need at the moment. So Sacramento, you're a big pile of mid. I don't expect you to fall completely out of, the play-in, but it's not out of the conversation, especially with the injuries piling up right now. It's not at the end of it. It's definitely not at the it's not the hardest possibility to imagine at this point, because there's serious threats here. And I mean, you're 5 games up on Houston from completely falling out of this. So that's at least positive. I think you have the tiebreakers over the Lakers and the Warriors. So, I mean, that's, again, there's little positives here, but ultimately it's got to be a very frustrating point for the Kings to be here, because it kind of felt predictable, like this is where they were going all along. And then my final group, the 11th seed Houston Rockets, probably the most complimentary mid you'll ever get. They've kind of been mid all season, just a little bit below for a while there. Then all of a sudden, these guys just couldn't lose. They're on an 11-game winning streak. They're 38-35 now, which is incredible for where their mark was. They're probably going to finish over 500 regardless of whether they make the play-in or not. At least I feel pretty comfortable about them doing that. But we're about to find out who they are. Jalen Green may have saved his future or may have changed the trajectory of the franchise in the interim. But at the moment, there's still a lot to be interested in to see if this can prove itself bountiful enough to continue to roll, first of all, but then continue to roll over this next 6-game stretch I have laid out in front of me. You're going to have the Mavs tonight. I'm recording this, midday Sunday. I think one game's already tipped off. I'm not even looking at it right now. I've actually got the Rangers stuff on right here, and so it's a little more. It's a good baseball team finally. You know what I mean? It's one baseball team. It doesn't take that much of my time. So you got the Mavs tonight. Then you have the Timberwolves, the Warriors, the Heat, the Mavs, and the Magic. So this next 6 games is going to prove a lot about who Houston is. And what I mean by that is it could be a 6-game losing streak, and then all of a sudden, well, all right, this is pretty easily figured out. Houston, you did great this season, but hey, time to start thinking about next year like we kind of thought you were. Or all of a sudden, Sacramento, Los Angeles, or Golden State are sitting there looking at each other like, fuck. You know what I mean? In this situation, you talk about the Mavs. In that situation, Mavs would have lost 2 games. So even maybe include them in the group that doesn't exactly enjoy Houston's success and late season resurgence. So we'll find out who they are this go around. I am interested in it. It's like I said, it's been exciting to see them turn a corner. I think there's been some interesting ways of building rosters done in the Lone Star State over the last decade or half decade. And Houston's done a good job. I think they've got a very interesting group moving forward, and I would like to see them at least stay in the contention. I think for me, I don't want to see them be humbled into, the lottery over this next 6 games. But the reality is that's sometimes how it goes. It's a little easier said than done. That's it with the mid. That's it pretty much with everybody who kind of matters, but doesn't necessarily matter all the way. The danger zone. These teams don't necessarily matter either, but boy, are they interesting to talk about. Milwaukee, they're 47-27. They're the Eastern Conference 2nd seed. They should have no reason to be in my danger zone. But Doc Rivers, you do exist. Doc Rivers, you will keep them in this tier until it's over. I said it before. I'm saying it again, and I will move forward because I'm sure if you've been following, you're tired of hearing it. They're not going away from the danger zone. If they're going to win the title this year, they're going to win it in the damn danger zone. Miami. Is there a hero to the rescue soon? I don't know, but Lord knows they probably need it. They've been able to sort of keep themselves afloat. They're 5-5 over the last 10, which is looking a little bit better than where they were last time we talked about them. They are certainly an interesting group for all the reasons we've seen the last couple of seasons, where they don't necessarily need to care about the regular season, but then in the regular postseason, they just are a different animal. Right now, as the 7th seed, they're just a game actually behind Indiana. So they can very easily keep up with them. They have a relatively easy finish to their schedule, so they can boost themselves out of this position, maybe even past Orlando if they do well enough. So that's what I would be hoping for. I don't know that I would count on it because I still don't know when Tyler Hero's coming back. You got a couple other guys banged up now. And we've seen the script before with Miami. So much so that I honestly don't even want to talk about them anymore because it's just like, apparently whatever the Miami Heat do just doesn't matter until the play-in postseason anyway. So in 2 weeks, we'll get our first real Miami Heat report when they decide that their season starts. Chicago. Chicago had been looking pretty awesome for a second there. I guess mostly framed around the frustration, right? How great this group is playing on the court despite all the injuries, all the drama, and, the kind of unfortunate reality that they're all stuck in mediocrity and that it might be something that the ownership is excited about and happy for. And I don't know. I don't want to accuse them, but it is something that obviously the fans have been doing for quite some time. Now you're hobbling to the finish. I think DeMar DeRozan had a very interesting conversation for Clutch Player of the Year for a second there. Now I'm wondering if it's going to be even possible for him to win it. We'll see what the stats are. I think, again, that one is clutch points scored, so it doesn't necessarily matter how bad the team is. But, I thought it would have been a fun end of the season. It would have been a nice way to go. Still rooting for that low key, because it doesn't really matter what Chicago does. I think that they're going to fall victim to one of the 3 teams in the play-in. I think that right now they're easily the worst team in the play-in, the Eastern play-in, maybe the worst team in both play-ins. And that's just kind of how it is. We'll look at what the future is for Chicago probably in a week or so, but it's still a little bit. It's a little bit back to being ugly again. The Dosunmu, Kobe White positive moments, they still exist, but it still feels so gloomy about what the outlook of this team is moving forward. And we even got a Lonzo Ball update that seemed mildly positive. It just still feels like all of it together. This danger zone is for this season, and now that we're finishing it, kind of starts you off next season off on maybe a bad foot. Same with the Brooklyn Nets. I think that they've been atrocious for a few games, a few weeks now. They're just 4-6 in their last 10. They've won 3 in a row. I mean, it's nice. Mikal Bridges changed his avatar to Antonio Brown dipping out during a Jets game. And after his comments about the team, about the way that he's sort of been forced into this Nets situation, it definitely makes you, as an outsider, look into this and say, hey, Brooklyn's over here telling us that, people want to play here. We're going to be able to compete. And the reality is kind of telling us a different thing. Reality is kind of telling us that the Brooklyn Nets are struggling to identify who they actually are as a franchise. I think the reality is sure, guys want to come to New York, I guess, but to be waiting on that line seems like a really bad idea. And I know the Knicks have already sort of stolen the blue-collar part of basketball in the city. So it's like, can we do that? Well, maybe not, but I think you kind of have to. I think that just waiting to be the next superstar's, girlfriend of the day, for lack of a better word, it just feels like a bad choice. It feels like you're sitting ducks again. And it feels like that's why there's probably a lot of guys on this roster that have talent and that you could build something around that don't even really want to be a part of it. Of course, let's not forget you fired the coach that you hired because of the other coach that fired. And it's bad. It's a bad situation. And it's weird to hear them continue to double down on how competitive they think they are as a first-class organization when they've just gone through this absolute dumpster fire of a situation with Kyrie, Kevin, and James that has led them to a point where, Phoenix is kind of struggling a little bit. We'll get to that. Clippers are kind of struggling a little bit. We'll get to that. Mavericks not too. Mavericks might be the happiest team that whole trio happened to some extent. But either way, the danger zone you sit, and the danger zone you shall be moving into next season. The Clippers, LA Clippers, as we get into the Western Conference, didn't exactly think that I would have the Clippers here. I thought I would be a little more stubborn about it. I would stick with them. They're only 5-5 in their last few games, but if you've watched the last two in particular, Philadelphia and Orlando, you're seeing a team that should win those games handedly, barely win those games, and in both occasions sort of needed to rely on some extracurricular calls. And I'm not saying that people are calling for whatever. Calls go for and against you all the time. In this case, back-to-back, they went for them. It's very favorable because had they lost those two games, you're talking about New Orleans and Dallas potentially being right on your ass or ahead of you at this point. I don't know where the tiebreaker is when it comes to Clippers Mavericks, but that would have definitely put the Pelicans ahead of you. So you've managed to stay above float a little bit. The vibes aren't great. You have James Harden closing out on a Kawhi Leonard 3-point shot in a win, but just one of those things that was sort of the first sign of what the fuck are they? What are they taking this seriously? And again, they're an older group. I could see exactly why this would not be the time of the year that they're putting pedal to the metal. But your coach is calling you soft. You need bailout games to keep away from having a really, really bad 10-game stretch. And, again, it's a favorable schedule. It could be all for naught because you could end up finishing in the 4 or 5, end up with New Orleans, maybe even, Sacramento or somebody who's a little more favorable to you. You win a series, and then all of this sort of kind of goes away. But I think it does, again, get back to the point where I don't trust this team fully. I don't trust everything it has. I really think it's an interesting group. I am very intrigued to watch it. I do not believe in it. They also have a back-to-back against Phoenix, who we will now bring up at some point in their remaining schedule. So that's kind of going to be the biggest point in this whole, I think, in my opinion, of this Western Conference run. I think that those two back-to-backs, LA Clippers versus Phoenix Suns, could end up being a very important one for a lot of other teams. Suns might be getting Damian Lee back, but otherwise they're healthy. They're just not very deep. Their schedule is going to be hard as hell. They have no teams left that are under 500. That's definitely a new thing. I think I've seen multiple people comment on how unusual that is. I don't think that I particularly love the group. I thought that they did a good job of building out this roster in theory, but in practice, it's certainly not lived up to the hype at all. I think with Royce O'Neal, I think with Eric Gordon, I think with even like a Thaddeus Young, you've done enough band-aiding to make this season look kind of salvageable. But I do end up thinking that the Suns are going to end up being in a weird position. And I think that, they really look like they had a chance to win a title last year before the Nuggets really, showed you what team chemistry could do. So for them to have dismantled it the way they did and then jumped into the Bradley Beal situation the way they did, it's very intriguing. It's very intriguing decision making. If it was 2K, I'm sure everybody in the world would have done it. But even in 2K, I don't know that it would work. It's interesting. It's cook that full basketball and full display, and the memes have been true so far. They've been reality. Golden State Warriors. We're going to finish out the danger zone here. The Warriors have been surviving, as the best way to put it. They're on a 3-game winning streak right now, and they've absolutely needed it as the Rockets have been surging. But Draymond Green is still acting like a jackass. It's not costing the Dubs games right at this exact moment, but he's still kind of acting a little too reckless. I think that's got to be cause for a lot of concern for the team. You saw Curry's reaction to an ejection the other night. He's got to be as frustrated with the Warriors franchise as he's ever been. So that's why I say, hey, you got 4 games against lottery teams. Otherwise, everybody else you're playing to finish the season is in a play-in conversation. I think they're going to do it. I think they're going to be fine. But I think, again, even if they get out of the play-in, what's this team going to do? You know, well, there's so many flaws. There's so many things that just are mismatched parts. I do kind of believe that the Warriors can set themselves up in the offseason to pivot on players, to restructure, some of the money that they're currently spending, and find a way to make the finish of Steph Curry's career comfortable and competitive. But I think that ultimately this is going to be another season that they end up walking away very frustrated and a little disheartened over. Again, I don't necessarily think Steph's going to be someone who would push them to the fire on this, but I do think this season will certainly test his limits pretty damn well, probably as well as he's ever been tested in that situation. All right. And then we've kind of gone through the big clip of this at 42 minutes. So I'm going to try to get through all of our last teams as quickly as possible. But of course, these are the meat and potatoes teams. I did lump 2 of my contender ifs together. One promoted, the LA Lakers, one staying firmly and stubbornly in the contenders if category. But both of them basically have the same projection from my opinion. For the Lakers, Gabe Vincent might be back soon, but you probably lost Christian Wood, Jared Vanderbilt. For Philly, you have a very important injury that you're tracking, the Joel Embiid injury. He's traveling with the team now. There's still it's a favorable schedule ahead for Philly. So if they wanted to slide him back, you could certainly see why. But ultimately, you're looking at 2 teams that I think have interesting depth, but not great depth. I think they have the potential for great depth. Like I could see both of the depths of these rosters going on a run, going on a heater, and helping both of these teams overachieve, which is why they're in my contender if category, especially together. But what I have also seen is a lot of clear issues with these groups, even when fully healthy. And that's sort of what frustrates me, especially with the Lakers side, is I'm like, man, when this is really put together, it looks very damning. But they just kind of fall off the cliff when it comes to the consistency levels, I think is probably the easiest way to look at it. They're 7-3 of their last 10. They're trying to surge. They're going to probably do their damnedest to get into the conversation of getting out of the play-in, but I think they're stuck in the play-in no matter what they do. They have a big 3-game away trip going on right now. They're going to be in Brooklyn, Toronto, and then Washington. They probably have to win all 3 of those games, I would say, to make themselves feel very comfortable, just with not falling out, not falling to the 10th spot, whatever, and just taking advantage of the schedule as it comes. But again, you get Davis, you get LeBron healthy. That's all you kind of need is the if. Same with Joel Embiid. But when it comes to the role players, I think you've got a lot, both sides, and you've got a lot of great, in theory, role players. I think consistency on an every night basis, you don't have enough guys that I can trust, both of you. And for that reason, they're both contenders if, but they're both contenders if in their own little category. Mostly just respecting the talents of the guys, those 3 guys mentioned, right? And that the teams are decent around them. But New York, I think this is where New York and Cleveland probably could have gotten lumped in together as well. I think with New York, you're looking at a very talented, deep roster, but it's a little bit like the opposite of the Lakers, where I do actually really like the quality of your depth. I don't know that I love the quality of your higher up talent. Jalen Brunson has deserved every bit of the recognition he's gotten. Really, not someone who I would include in this, but even at his best, I still think maybe Jalen Brunson's, a number 2 on a title winner. So then that, puts a lot of pressure on Julius Randle, OG Anunoby, Mitchell Robinson, guys who are definitely not the number 1 option on this team, or a number 1 option on a title winner. But, Julius Randle thinks he probably is. OG Anunoby is probably honestly, Mitchell and Anunoby are probably both the high-level role players you need to win a championship. The rest of the group around it is such a fun, interchangeable group, even though there's not a whole lot interchanging because it's Thibs. There's still a lot of fun, usable pieces on this roster. But again, we're sitting here saying, what does the upper end look like? So I think for the Knicks, you're praying for that Eastern Conference Finals run this season. I think that's the natural progression for them, and then it's maybe you go big star hunting next season. But we'll have to kind of see how that goes. We'll go ahead and skip into Cleveland here because, again, New York has a decent schedule coming up. It's going to be kind of tough, but there's enough wiggle room for them to gain ground on Cleveland, especially with Cleveland being a little more injured. Cleveland's 45-29. They're going to be without Dean Wade. They've kind of got some lingering issues when it comes to Karis LeVert, Isaac Okoro, and, of course, Donovan Mitchell. Now, Mitchell's back. Already played in a game, won a game. Looking good there for Donovan. Now, they're about to go on 5 straight road games. Then they get 3 back at home to finish. So not a kind road trip when it comes to Cleveland. They're going to play some tough teams on that road trip as well, especially ending it with the back-to-back in LA where you have Lakers then Clippers. Those aren't necessarily the most ideal games, but you got to play them either way. I would kind of look at Cleveland to potentially fall. But again, every time I've sort of expected Cleveland to slip, they've grabbed onto the rope and they've pulled themselves back in. And that's why I sort of feel like I probably should just lump them together with New York anyway. Because I do think the Contender If is very iffy, but I do really like what they've built. And I do really think that Donovan is that special of a talent, especially this season. If he can get his body right, I think there's no way you can rule out the Cleveland Cavaliers winning a round or 2, especially after last season. It's mostly the same group, except for they've gotten a little bit better at the positions they need to. A little worried about Marcus Morris coming in and screwing that up. But ultimately, I think that he could be the positive ray of light for them as well. So I'm trying to stay with the positive on that. And ultimately having a great, finish to a very long, tumultuous season where, I think that there's been a lot of storylines going through Cleveland this year, but for them to come out of it potentially as the 3 seed in the Eastern Conference, I think that's pretty damn incredible. And JB Bickerstaff and the organization should feel really good about where they're headed, which is why I do kind of have them as a sleeper to make a little bit of a run here. I guess they're not much of a sleeper anymore, but they've skidded a little bit. So maybe there's teams starting to back away off of it. I'm saying don't do that just yet. I know last year was tough. I know that this that the desire to try to push Donovan Mitchell onto a different roster has existed. I get all that. But I think this has been a super resilient group, and I have to give them that credit. All right. And this is where I think I get the most excited, most interested when it comes to the future of the league. I think this is going to be my top 5 teams in the NBA. And wouldn't you know it, all but one of them are located in the Western Conference. So for now, at least, Minnesota, you might be on the way to the Eastern Conference if we expand down the road. But we'll get to that when we get to that. Dallas Mavericks. Welcome to being the 6th seed. You're out of the play-in for the first time in a while. Should have been here for a long, long time, but you're here. Doesn't matter. Trade deadline, things looked amazing. We're like, exactly. This is what they should have done. Then you get back from All-Star break, and you look like the worst defense in basketball, maybe in basketball history. And then you're like, oh, shit, maybe it's the coach. Maybe it's this. Maybe it's that. But now 9-1 over the last 10. You've built yourself into being something that I think is unique in the Western Conference, except for the teams that are listed ahead of you. You're built like a real basketball team. There's not sort of a hodgepodge of what can we put together around what the good pieces of our team. This is a very, very well thought out group now, finally in Dallas. The only player missing really with injury is Josh Green, but of course it's important to note that Luka has been kind of favoring I think it was a hamstring for the last couple of weeks now, or no, it was Achilles. So obviously you're a little more concerned with that. But the injuries part of this has worked out. Very favorable schedule to close this whole thing out. And in my opinion, I would love to see the Mavericks take care of it and for Luka to steal the MVP last minute. I think that they're both opportunities are there. I don't think the Mavericks need to go as far as the number 1 seed to steal it from Nikola. I don't, or SGA. I think people want to vote Luka into this, if I'm being honest. And then, so here's your roadmap to finish the season, Mavs fans. You have Houston, Golden State, Houston, Atlanta, Golden State, Houston, Charlotte, Miami, Detroit, and Oklahoma City. So 2 repeats, 2 teams that are very important to the situation. But essentially, and the way I'm looking at it, 4 total chances, 4 wins. If you get those 4 wins, I don't even care if you lose to Atlanta, Charlotte, Miami, Detroit, and Oklahoma City. That's 4 out of 5 games too, right? So that's pretty significant if you lost those other 5 games. But ultimately, those 4 wins would mean so much more than those 5 losses that's pretty much all the Mavs have to look at. Obviously, win as many games, yada, yada, yada. But when you're looking at those 4 games in particular, you're getting just what you got last week with Sacramento. A chance for this team to see its food, eat its food, and not regurgitate its food. You know what I mean? You're better than these teams. You're bigger than these teams. Go out there and play better. If they beat you, they beat you, but go out there and handle the games that you're supposed to handle. And then if you do that, then you can easily see a road where this 6-game winning streak extends damn near till the end of the season, Not saying it's that likely, but I mean, it's there. The talent's there. The players are playing well. These guys are winning games when they're not even shooting particularly well. That's impressive and incredible. Kyrie and Luka look like very, very dangerous tandem. They look like a very, very dangerous group. So again, I think that you're looking at a team that is probably still a tier below the rest of the title contenders, because I think there's pieces they rely on in Dallas that maybe they don't need to be there much longer or don't need to be relied on that much longer. I think there's an issue with Lively where he's still a little young, and there's still ceiling on some other guys. So while you're developing this group into what should be a title contending group for a couple of years, this is just a point where, you have to look at it and say, hey, take what we can get. All we need to worry about right now, finish the season out strong, try to steal an MVP for Luka. And then once we get into the Western Conference playoffs, if we've handled that, then we're probably hosting a series at this point now. And we're probably hosting a series against a team that we have a great matchup against, allowing this thing to continue to trot on. And obviously that matters a lot for the Mavericks. If they don't win the title this year, the only thing they could do that would be catastrophic would be to explode early, right? So set yourself up for success. Get the Luka MVP season out of the way. Get another little run going, and then give yourself that momentum to leap off of, and maybe even be the odds-on favorite going into next season. Moving into the next groups, Minnesota Timberwolves. Karl-Anthony Towns is still out. Rudy Gobert and Anthony Edwards are both day-to-day. One has a rib issue. One has a finger issue. A finger issue from dunking a ball so damn hard that he gave somebody a concussion. They've got 9 left, 6 of them against teams still playing for something. They've been handling their business very well. They're the Western Conference number 1 seed at the moment. But of course, drama still has to ensue. I'm so sorry, Timberwolves fans. You don't deserve this. You deserved a lot of what's happening this season. You deserve the hope of what's still to come. You don't deserve Glenn Taylor and the continuous bullshit that man has put the franchise under for I don't even know how many years, longer than I've been watching basketball. I don't know what it was. I watched the Dane Moore podcast a little bit before recording. It's just Glenn Taylor. This is just who he is. You know, rich guys with a lot of money, and they don't see the world. They don't see the rational, real world like the rest of us folks that have to. And sometimes it comes out like this. And here we are again. If you're not familiar with the news, essentially Glenn Taylor had already essentially sold the team. Had a couple of rules with it. Team wasn't supposed to move from Minnesota, and he still wanted to do this slow transition that they've been doing into the new ownership group. However, as it was supposed to be sent final, he puts out a PR release that says, nah, I just don't want to sell anymore. And now we have a legal situation, and one that's probably not going to get cleared up anytime soon. All the players, all the coaches have had respectful comments on it. I don't know what the good answer is for any of them. Most of them just going to blow it off like it doesn't matter. But ultimately, that does matter a lot. I think some of this positive momentum was from the ownership change anyway. So it's just one of those things I can't help but think that the human psyche isn't going to be affected to some extent. I mean, the whole organization has just gotten thrown on its head. I mean, you're over here, okay, we're going to go through. So many people probably working for the Timberwolves that are thrilled to have these new owners. All of a sudden, nope, the old mean boss is going to stick his nose back in it. So absolutely crazy stuff there. I do still think A-Rod and Mark Lowry will own the Timberwolves eventually. I just don't know what kind of crap we're going to have to go through, if it's going to go through the whole off season of this, whatever. Obviously, the reality in Minnesota is that Karl-Anthony Towns' injury is what's more important for their title hopes than this ownership group thing. But it can't just be understated. You know, it's very troubling. It's very, very troubling, and it's not new for Timberwolves fans. And it's a disappointment for all NBA fans, because I think everyone was ready to move on from Glenn Taylor and have competent ownership groups. It's been a goal of mine since Sterling was kicked out of the league, is let's get some competent owners in this thing, because it's not good that we have so many incompetent owners in the NBA. Ugh. The Oklahoma City Thunder. The Thunder down under. 51-22, Western Conference second seed, 7-3 in their last 10. There was a moment here where we thought, hey, this is a great opportunity for Denver and Minnesota to run away with the number one seed. SGA is going to miss some time. He has missed the time, but now Josh Giddey's playing good basketball. So that's kind of crazy. You just didn't expect that whole thing to go. But, I mean, opportunity changes things, obviously. With Giddey playing so much better, does this stabilize a group that I was very concerned with, especially with him on the court in the non-SGA minutes? Or is this a little bit of a mirage, and they're going to still see the same sag-off coverage of Josh Giddey in the playoffs that's going to end up dooming their spacing and potentially dooming them in a first-round series? That's kind of the question that we have there. Their next 5 games are going to be on the road. Clearly, that's not the most ideal situation for anyone to get into, but, they're a talented young group, so I think they can survive it. But this is mostly why I've always kind of considered them to be the 3 seed, and I think that's where they will finish. I think Denver will do enough to pass them. I think they will struggle enough on this 5-game road streak to allow that to happen. But again, it's been a great season. SGA is still odds-on MVP favorite, I think, for a lot of people. If not, it's him or Nikola, and then you get this whole conversation of voter fatigue for Nikola. So interesting group to look at. We'll pick them apart in a million ways once we get into the playoffs. When you're looking at this from a 2K perspective, And I always like to do that because I think 2K is a great reflection of theory and on paper, and then the reality is what we're living in and what we're trying to guess, right? And the 2K reality of Oklahoma City is, you know what I mean? This is so much fun. There's so much room for expansion. It's just getting started. But the reality is, this team's kind of walking into a buzzsaw. You know what I mean? What if they pair with Dallas? What if they get Phoenix and Phoenix is playing the best basketball? If they get the Lakers and the Lakers have all this experience and size, and you know what I mean? What if you have Steph Curry? It looks like it could be a tough draw. So I think there's a lot of reason for people to be a little doubtful. I'm not exactly on that level yet, but it is a team with mostly no playoff experience. I know the bubble featured a little bit of SGA and Lou Dort, but for the most part, this group has not been to the playoffs together, and that'll matter. And we watched Memphis completely throw away a perfect opportunity last year, right? And we all kind of saw it coming. I don't think this team has the exact same issues, but they're riding that same line. Either way, it's an incredibly bright future. You know, if they can get this thing turned around, if this is a very mature group of young men, then sure, this title could be on the table. But history says not to trust the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I'm sorry, Thunder fans, that's just the reality of the situation. Now, let's move into our final two teams. Things have not changed. I have not found a team that is worthy enough all season to jump into my contenders list. I've only had two all season, and it looks like we're finishing the season with just two. The Boston Celtics and the Denver Nuggets. We'll start with the reigning champion Denver Nuggets. Right now, you're battling injuries with Jamal Murray, a little bit with Zeke Naji. And Naji's kind of a fringe rotation player anyway, so who knows how much that actually matters. You have a very interesting schedule. You have 8 games left. 5 of them are against teams below 500. That's very good. Jamal Murray's absence has certainly cost them a chance to lock in the 1 seed. I mean, it was sitting there with the Karl Anthony Towns injury, with the SGA injury. It was right there. But then, you know, they've got to manage their own injury stuff. And Jamal Murray's knee flare-up was certainly something they didn't want to gamble with. And then, you know, the cost of losing him in the playoffs is obviously way too severe. So naturally, it's understandable that they're going to baby him. How long they baby him will be interesting. But again, with 5 out of the 8 games you have left being against below 500 teams, I would not be surprised if Jamal Murray barely plays at all in the final 8 games, because they know they don't need to. And, you know, frankly, this is your reward for gaming the system. You might have Nikola just win an MVP and get you through another regular season, and then Jamal gets to come in fully healthy, happy, and your death, your death lineup of those 5 starters, it's the best 5 in basketball, with all due respect to this next team. The Boston Celtics, you know, as far as injuries go, it's just Jaden Springer's got a little bit of a day-to-day knee stuff, nothing crazy. He's probably not even playing in the playoffs unless it's the first round anyway. They've got 8 games left. Only 2 of them are away. They've already clinched the first seed in the East. They're healthy. They're rolling. You know, I feel like it's okay not to go on these giant monologues about the teams that are going to be the best in the playoffs, but I also feel like I haven't done a proper job of celebrating what they've done this season. So we'll try to finish. We'll try to get fixated on that once the playoffs start. But for the Celtics, we know what this is. We know this is a very talented group. We know that Brad Stevens did a remarkable job of pivoting off of last season's failure. Again, by the way, and we know that on paper there should be nothing standing in the way of the Celtics other than a very good reigning champion. But you have pause. It's the same reason we have pause for wanting to write off Miami. We have pause for wanting to write off the Lakers. We have history with these teams. We know that they're capable of doing these things. And for the Celtics, the history is on a negative side. Of course you're great right now. Of course this is going to go well. What happens when you hit adversity? This thing's going to crumble. I don't think that's going to happen. I do think that the Celtics have built a roster worthy of the 2008 succession. You know what I mean? In 2008, if you weren't following the game, it was pretty damn clear once they got Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett that they had put together the best team of basketball, and they did really well of keeping all those pieces. They kept Rondo in the trade for KG. They ended up filling out the lineup really, really well with veterans that year, especially. And it was perfect. I mean, it was just you built the title winner, and it did it. It did what it was supposed to do. I kind of feel like it's a good possibility that Boston's done that again. It's gonna take maturing from Jason Tatum. Not that his game has regressed in a lot of ways, but there's still the concern on the double teams. There's still concern with the decision making. And then overall as a team, there's still a lot of concern with the reliance on the three-point shot. But all that to say, you know, the concept of what you can get out of Drew Holiday, Derek White, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Kristaps Porzingis as a five-man group it's pretty incredible. I mean, that's a really, really, really good five. And especially right now when we're talking about how historically good I think Denver's starting five has been, and how lethal I think those guys are as far as their chemistry now. The Celtics could have something there. Obviously they're not there on the chemistry side of things. What Denver built was a long time coming, other than Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. But at the same time, just a phenomenal group that they put together. And the Bucks exploded this season, you know, the off season by trading for Damian Lillard, and we all thought that they may have drastically shifted the title into their odds because of how perfect in theory that duo is. But man, they also really just let Drew Holiday slip into the Celtics' lap like that. And Drew's performances aren't always going to look pretty, but he was the third guy on that other team. Now he's like the fourth, fifth guy when it comes to offensive issues, which is really his only glaring concern. Yeah, it could be a tough one. We could be looking at the Boston Celtics winning another championship. And, you know, it's been a long time coming, but we will see. I'm excited for the playoffs this year. I've got a little bit of a preview here of what the future's in store. So next week, we're going to do a full WNBA, NBA analysis of players. Now, I'm not going to go like 60 men deep in the NBA side, but I'm going to give you a pretty damn good idea of everything you need to know about the WNBA draft, which will probably be happening like a day or two after I post that video. And then get you really, really well caught up with at least the consensus lottery picks is probably where I'll cut off when it comes to the NBA side. I don't want to do 60 names. or 100 names. I don't have that time. But I'm happy to look at the next, 20, 25-ish guys that could all be in the lottery. Well, not obviously all, but that are all sort of floating around the lottery. And there's going to be more guys this year because it's a little bit more of a wonky draft. At least there's not as concrete of decisions from all of the different pundits. So I will be using my week to figure out everybody's theories. I don't do a lot of my scouting until right now too. So this will be a fun little first look for both of us. And I'll just kind of give you a quick, hey, this is what I look for in these guys and gals. And this is what these players have. And then we'll move into the play-in. Will be the week after that. And so in 2 weeks from now, and then I'm not going to do a show most likely because I'll be in New York City in 3 weeks after that. But if some crazy stuff happens while I'm in New York, I might just say screw it and do something live from the scene of Madison Square Garden or something. Who knows? But either way, thank you again for watching. Please like it. Please share it. Please subscribe on it. Comment a couple of things. Talk some crap about us. I don't really care. Tag somebody who likes to shit on things. Like, all negative energy is still positive energy when allocated correctly.